One of the most fascinating leaders of the Anabaptists is a man history almost forgot. His name was Pilgram Marpeck, and he was born and lived right here in Rattenberg, and his house is just down the hill from this castle. Talented, successful, and brilliant, he was appointed to the city council by age 18. By age 30, he was mayor. Throughout that time, Anabaptists were coming through this region, and the city cracked down hard on these new teachings. On January 1st, 1528, Pilgram Marpeck requested to not have to prosecute the Anabaptists. On January 3rd, he was ordered to comply. On January 10th, he attempted to fulfill those orders. On January 14th, an Anabaptist was executed right here at this castle. 2 weeks later, Pilgram Marpeck resigned.
So we're at a pretty significant place, a very narrow little alpine city where Pilgram Marpeck was born, right here. And
right here.
He lived in this house.
Wow.
This is the home he would have left from. Why don't you give us some more context on this region as a whole so we can kind of figure out what was the context that Marpeck was coming from?
This region here is called the Tyrol, and it was under the Habsburgs. And this was really an important area for them because it was a major mining area. So they got a lot of their wealth from the silver and other minerals that were mined here. So it was a really important piece of Habsburg territory. One of the things that's really interesting for us is that this was one of the hot spots for Anabaptist conversion. Right at the very beginning, Blaurock came here, right at the very beginning. He left Switzerland, came here, and this just proved to be a really fruitful field. And then after that, many people came. If you go from when Blaurock was here till close to the end of the 1500s, we think there were 20,000 converts from this area. Whoa. Most of them either were killed. The Habsburgs were rabidly anti-Anabaptist. So they were either killed or they mostly went to Moravia. And there they established Hutterite colonies. And some of them were more Swiss brethren. So this was a really important piece for us, a really important place.
Looking into some of the details of that mining area, and it kind of gives you, an idea of that, you got a bunch of radicals that aren't able to fit into society very good. You can find work here. They employed, it's one record I read, over 50,000 miners who came from Austria, Italy, around Europe, to find work here. They had 68 miles of tunnels from the miners here. And that's just an incredible amount.
This particular place and another place called Schwarz, those were the two main mining areas. So I think you could probably double the mining miles if you looked at that area.
And then another thing that happened around here with all those thousands of guys, we have records of a lot of reformers, still Catholic, some Lutherans, some just radicals, would come here and preach to these areas. And there's some records of them in the thousands meeting, and they're hearing about these new ideas about salvation by faith, or criticism about the things that are happening, the way we need to change things. And in that, they're smuggling Bibles, they're smuggling pamphlets, and people are starting to talk. And that's the kind of atmosphere that Pilgram would have been raised in. So a little bit about his particular life. Pilgram was born here, and this was where he moved from. His father would have been very successful. Heinrich became very wealthy in the work here, actually became mayor himself. But when it comes to Pilgram, at 18 years old, he was already on the city council. By age 25, he started his own business where he was transporting ore. It was so successful that he's on record at the highest tax bracket here. There's records of him actually loaning money to Archduke Ferdinand himself at 5% interest.
One of the very important dynasties maybe the most important dynasty we're going to hear about all throughout the documentary is the Habsburgs.
Right.
At the beginning, there were Habsburgs in Spain and that's Charles, the Emperor, Charles V. And there were Habsburgs here in Austria, and that's the Archduke Ferdinand.
Okay.
They're brothers, and they're both strongly Catholic, strongly anti-Anabaptist. And as long as the Emperor is alive, Charles V, he pretty much controls this whole area. When he dies, he gives his son, and I'm sorry, I said when he dies, when he retires. He's an emperor who retired from his job rather than died and left it behind. So anyway, he retired. I believe the year was 1558, and his son got the western part of the Habsburgs' land. That would be the Netherlands. That would be a part of France, close to the Rhine River. It would have been Spain, and it would have included southern Italy. Then Ferdinand would have gotten the lands in Germany and Austria. He was then chosen emperor.
So by age 30, he's made mayor, and then at 31, Archduke Ferdinand himself personally appointed him as the leader of the mining districts of this region. That would have been high-level job.
Because when we walked up here, we're looking at this thing, and this is a nice house.
Yeah.
You're looking down the street, you're like, that's a nice house. So that was the same thing we said when we were in Zurich.
Yeah.
We're sitting in front of Conor Goebel, what used to be Conor Goebel's house. We're looking at, wow, this
Yeah.
is nice.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
His dad was an aristocrat. His dad was on the city council. Like, there was money in that family. Same thing with Marpeck. What a unique character. Not really the profile I would have thought of as being a significant Anabaptist leader.
His education was different than Conrad's and others, but he was still brilliant. Tell us a little bit about just how he would have been educated.
Well, I don't believe he went to university,
Right.
but he would have known Latin. But the thing that really stands out is he learned engineering, and that's what made him useful.
Yeah.
And that's why he could direct the mining here. And the mining wasn't just digging into the ground; it included chopping trees down higher up, and then sluicing them down where they could be used down further below. I would say the two key things were he was well read, but he knew Latin and he knew engineering. But knowing Latin meant that he also read extensively. When he decides to leave the Catholics, he first becomes Lutheran, but he doesn't like everything there, and then eventually he becomes an Anabaptist.
And right out of the starting gate, he's engaging in deep theological concerns. And you can see that his upbringing, was a true Renaissance man type of person, where he had the engineering, he had the theology, he had the understanding right from the start.
And also well read in the early church writings as well, right?
It's interesting, like particularly when he gets to the balance, and we'll talk about that here a little bit, and talking about his views of the sacraments and everything. Yeah, he's arguing against two sides, and in those you're hearing him quote Tertullian, you're quoting the early Christians, and even here in this mining town, he was well read in the patristics.
The Tyrol was a main source of Habsburg wealth because of the silver, the lead, salt, all kinds of minerals they could extract. This city and another one called Schwatz were two of the main industrial centers making the wealth. The miners were not always treated really well.
Okay.
You mentioned they came from all over,
Right.
and you don't have to treat a foreigner so well.
Yeah.
So that's probably part of it.
Yeah.
But anyway, those that are not treated well, they already knew the Christian message by and large. But now they're hearing that Jesus makes us all God's sons and daughters, that we're all in the image of God. And it's not that the people that heard this message and accepted it wanted to throw off all authority.
Right.
But they saw a real distinction between how you, the Lord, live and how I, the miner, live.
Okay.
So that was a big part of what drew them. This was an important Habsburg center.
Okay.
And this castle would have been their seat of authority in this area.
So you got up on these cliffs. They were like, the rest of the castle is fairly large, and then the city is down
Below.
the other side.
Yes. Now, I don't know this for sure, but I imagine that a trial would have been held there because this is probably where the official, the Habsburg official, stayed.
He had his position. He was wealthy. He had a reputation.
Beautiful place to live.
Beautiful place to live.
I mean,
he
nice
had
house.
his wife, children.
Yeah.
And to give that up for something inside of him, something that drove him, a faith that he didn't see in his life. And he traded all that prosperity to follow Jesus.
But if you think about a modern day contrast, say a very wealthy businessman, he's got a family, a nice house. You're so rich, you're loaning money out to the president, you know. And yet someone like that looks at their life and says, actually, no, I don't really have it all. Like, I'm missing something. That's important. That's a significant part of the story for really all of these early Anabaptists. They had pretty good lives, you know.
Really
Michael
did.
Saller, you're the prior of the monastery. You have pretty good life, you know.
Was well off
but he looks at that and it's like, no, something's missing. Something is missing here, and I need to dig into what that is.
I'll give up the whole world to follow Jesus. So by 1527, known Anabaptists started to be persecuted here. And here's the thing. They asked Pilgram Marpeck to be part of the persecuting of these Anabaptists. And he complied as best he could. He tried to do a middle ground, so he would actually go through a lot of trouble to go to the courts and to try to get lighter sentences for them and change things for them. And then he was actually given as part of his job description that it was for him to do this. And then we have on record that he formally requested in 1528 to not to be a part of this. I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't a part of the job. This isn't what I signed up for, you know. And that began to eat at him. But then a very gifted Anabaptist, which we're even going to talk about a little bit in our episode about the Hutterite mission machine, is Leonhard Schiemer. And Schiemer's the one who wrote the famous thing about the flask, you know, that some people say that we convert people so much that you must be drinking some kind of potion or something.
Yeah, there's some kind of magic involved.
And he gives him, and we'll give that answer later. But this is where he dies. So he's captured here, and the laws were that he was going to be prosecuted and persecuted and put to the end of his life. So again, on January 1st, we have on record that he formally requested, I don't want to be a part of this. January 3rd, we have on record that he was ordered to comply. January 10th, we have on orders that he was actually trying to do that. So we do see him just wrestling. I mean, you can literally get into where he's wrestling for this. On January 14th, Leonhard Schiemer was condemned to die by burning. Probably by Marpeck's working, said, okay, no, we'll just execute him by cutting his head off. And so they at least get the sentence not to be burned at the stake. And then he has to experience that whole thing of him dying there, and then something happened. The records seem to indicate that he was executed here, and then...
Like the castle, right?
This
is the Habsburg castle.
This is the Habsburg castle.
Right?
He was tried here, executed here. They had to cut off his head, and then maybe down there or up here somewhere would have burned him. But then there he was. And we could obviously see through the record that he was, you know, wrestling with this. And then let's see that he could perhaps even have smelled the smoke. Look how close this is actually to where this execution happened.
And again, for context, you know, this is Habsburg Empire, Catholic.
Yeah.
They're very, we don't want the Anabaptists here. Marpeck is in the local politics of this city, you know, city council, mayor, and so forth.
And we clearly have records of him struggling through this.
Yeah, and
so trying to find the middle road, you know, trying to play, you know, in both worlds.
And you have this Anabaptist who's executed right here at this castle. And we're at the overlook here where the castle walls like built onto this, right? And Marpeck's house pointed out to us here.
So Marpeck's house right down here where he was born and raised all the way up until this incident.
And you can imagine, you know, when they burn this Anabaptist after they behead him, I mean, the smoke would have traveled right here. You can imagine Marpeck, you know, be like, wow.
You would have heard the commotion. You would have smelled the smell. Mm-hmm. And we know this. 2 weeks later, he resigns and leaves town and becomes an Anabaptist. Sometime also during this time, we don't know the exact time, his wife has died. And from here, Pilgram Marpeck becomes one of the main leaders of the Anabaptists.
Marpeck leaves Rattenberg right after, you know, very soon after this execution happens, and comes to here, Moravia, which is now the modern day Czech Republic.
That's right. And, you know, and sometime during this time period, he married Anna, and moved here. And this Moravian area becomes very important, not just for understanding Pilgram Marpeck, but understanding early Anabaptists in general, because it allows a spot where he discusses things that are more conservatively leaning one way, or more liberal leaning the other, more spiritualist in one way, more Catholic in the other. And so a lot comes out in the Moravians. So yes, he comes here, probably coming in the different communitarian and non-communitarian radicals of the Radical Reformation that are here, and he tends to be with them for a while, and it seems to be this is the place where he was baptized, him and Anna. So he begins to grow and to develop his Anabaptist conviction, and he's quickly an organizer. I think it shows off in his skills, with the workplace and everything. So he gets baptized, he gets ordained, or put into some sort of leadership. We don't have any of those details, and probably ends up, most historians are saying, in the Austerlitz area. And Pilgram Marpeck is a favorite, particularly to historian guys that you dig into it, and he's a favorite for many reasons, because we see him as sort of this middle ground guy. And I know as historians it's considered wrong to put our image onto the historic figures. It's an anachronism, to do that. On the other hand, it's also wrong to think of these people as totally different than us. And I don't know, when I read Marpeck and I read these circles that were here in this Moravian area, I don't know, it seems like I really can relate. So for instance, this becomes later on, after he goes to Strasbourg, and we're going to go there next, he begins to always have a connection here. And so in that connection, you're seeing him have conflicts early on with the Hutterites. He loved the zeal and the mission drive and everything, but they're what he considered to be a forced community of goods. In other words, to join the community, it was a rule, you had to have complete community of goods. He loved community of goods, but forced, no, that's too much. Later on, he's writing to spiritualists. When he gets to Strasbourg, we'll talk about that, and you see his writings. But then even later in his life, you see him writing to people who have taken his ideas and said, okay, we don't need any of those kind of regulations and those kind of things. And you're telling them, no, come back. And so it's a fascinating piece, and it allows us to dig into the different personalities of the different Anabaptist communities right from the beginning. From here, let's go to Strasbourg, where he really settles in, and you start to see him trying to work with reformers, trying to still write letters to different places. I think we'll really see him shining as one of the very interesting figures in early Anabaptism. And as we discussed in the Michael Sattler episode, Strasbourg is a place where there's a lot of transition.
It's one of the last places to actually establish a state church. Capito and Butzer, they don't go there right away. And so that opens the door for lots of other people to come here. And I think that the two men were more inclined to try to convince people rather than to persecute them.
Right.
So it was an open place. It was an open city.
So it was September 1528 was the date. Now, when he got here, this was already a little bit of a hub already of Anabaptists. There was approximately 250 Anabaptists that were already in the city. And there had already been, like Michael Sattler had come through here. And then in particular, there was already, not too long right before he got here, there was a big debate with Hans Dink. And that stirred up some differences between the Anabaptists and the Reformers.
Yeah, the Reformers from that point, they didn't attack the Anabaptists, but they wouldn't do public disputations with them anymore. They did have private ones, like with Sattler. Something about the Dank disputation didn't go well in their opinion.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it was.
So it's interesting that here in Strasbourg, like a lot of the early leaders came through here, and they kind of like almost just seemed to miss each other. Michael Sattler, like we had the last episode, he came in 1527. Here in 1528, we have Pilgram Marpeck. In 1529, we have Milker Hoffman coming here, and we'll be talking about him here in just a little bit.
They overlap.
And
Marpeck is not happy with what Hoffman has to say.
Yeah.
That's one part of the story I didn't know before doing this trip. but how many Anabaptists kind of flowed through here. And it was a bit of a safe haven to allow them to get some things down on paper, so to speak, solidify some things, et cetera, et cetera. And it makes sense. Pilgram Marpeck ends up in the same spot.
So it's not just the Anabaptist groups are here, but there was also like different radicals that were kind of on the fringes of Anabaptism, like Schwenkfeld and such. Tell us a little bit about that, the spiritualists that were here in this area.
Schwenkfeld felt that the church was so corrupt that it was really impossible to start a new church until a new word from God came.
Right, wow.
So they stopped baptism, they stopped Lord's Supper. It's not that they didn't think they were right and things they should do, they just thought they needed another word from God. The Anabaptists said, no, we've already got that word, it's the New Testament.
Right.
However, there were a lot of things about the Anabaptists, the fact that they pointed to the interior so much, not exclusively, that the spiritualists drew them. Marpeck, his biggest fight was with Schwenkfeld.
And this is the first time where Marpeck meets Schwenkfeld and starts getting to that, because later writings that kind of pulls out a lot of his incarnational teachings, right, where he is having to balance between these spiritualists here. Now, wouldn't Hans Denk also would have been in that camp?
Well, Hans Denk is a really interesting person who seems to have one foot pretty much with the evangelical Anabaptists, our ancestors, and with the spiritualists. At the end of his life, he dies from the plague. At the end of his life, he writes something called the Recantation, but it seems that he is simply saying, what we did was too much. We should have been slower and not as hard pushing as we were. It doesn't seem like he's really saying, I don't wish I had been baptized, but the whole thing was probably inappropriate considering where the society was.
Wow, that's fascinating. So
so that's some context then for where Pilgram Marpeck is coming to at the time. But you mentioned this earlier, Dean, but what were maybe some other reasons they might have ended up in this city as well?
So it must have been attractive. You remember his role there in the mines with his parents and everything, and what he was raised. So when he came here in September of 1528, he got a job working in the waterworks. One of the charms, certainly, of Strasbourg are still these canals that they've built to move timber, and him particularly in this spot was moving those logs through here, and that gave him employment.
I wish we could find specific. Oh, we know he built that piece right there.
We looked.
And we searched and searched. But what you're describing is someone who's pretty important to the functioning of the city. You know, the waterworks, the hydraulic systems, the bringing timber in from the Black Forest into the city for its many uses and things like that. Did he have like a job offer or something? Do we even know?
It's not written in the records like we do later when we get to Augsburg, but we do know that he had this position and that he became a citizen in 1531. And it's a part of Marpeck that's so fascinating, I think, to us, and why he becomes kind of a favorite of a lot of people, because he tried to engage, with the community. He was a real citizen, while still being a true citizen of the kingdom of God. And I think that's an impressive part of him. Still pastoring, but yet working with people every day in places like this would have been really fascinating.
There is something else that should be said. Whereas Sattler seems to have had a very peaceful time with the reformers here, Marpeck must have been a little bit more driving because they actually expelled
That's a really
him.
good point. Yeah.
So
That's a good point.
I'm just,
just bringing it out.
I like a lot of what he says. I just think it's interesting that there is a contrast here.
So, he had a lot going for him. He had, he was all that he's been through in his journey. He lost a wife, got married again, went to Moravia, started meeting the Anabaptists there. Some kind of leadership was there in Moravia, was sent here pretty soon into leadership here. And from here, he seems to be, we have letters where he was writing from all the way from the Tyrol Anabaptists to the northern areas here. And he had a pretty big footprint of an early Anabaptist leader, had a good job, but then things went wrong. December 18th, 1531, the government said, okay, we like what you're doing, but you are going to need to bear arms in case we get attacked, and you're going to have to give an oath of allegiance to the government. And again, you see the conviction and the integrity, had this great position. I can't do it.
He did ask for a little bit more time, and they did give that to him.
Okay.
So that's to the credit of the
Reformers.
council.
Yeah.
But ultimately has to leave the city.
Remarkable chapter and a leader.
And from here, there's 12 years. We don't know exactly where he was. He did go to Switzerland, we know that, but
And then maybe come back here every now and then. There seems to be some
Maybe
records.
visit.
probably
Yeah.
not in the city, but he had congregations in the countryside.
Pilgram Marpeck just had to leave Strasbourg. Where does he go after that?
Well, there are 12 years in which we don't know the details. We do know he was in Moravia. We know he was in eastern Switzerland. And we do know in eastern Switzerland he used his engineering skills to build a linen production factory. And that was between St. Gallen and Appenzell. But other than that, we don't have much detail.
What we do know is that in 1544, he accepted a job right here in Augsburg, current Augsburg, Germany, as the master of the waterworks of this place. Now, these waterworks, as we can see even here in Augsburg, is still charming today.
It's a World Heritage Site.
Actually, in
as well, right?
2019,
Yeah.
the whole waterworks system here became a protected World Heritage Site. And that would have been a very high position. Of course, like we were talking in Strasbourg, he would have had all that experience there and was able to bring that here. We even has in the court records how much money he received. It says he took 150 guilders a year. Looking that up in current money, it's not just an exorbitant amount of money. It's middle class, upper middle class, but he would have also had, it seems like, a nice place to live for him and Anna. Looking at this stunning 16th century map, we can almost trace the path of the log. So now these canals would have been used for several things. They were able to do clean water in, bad water out. It was able to help with sewage. It helped them to bring transportation into the city. But particularly with Pilgram Marpeck, it was able to bring large logs from the forestry into here that people could use for craftsmen and this type of thing. It was an extraordinary process that they had here. And so, again, in the 16th century map, we can almost trace the path that carried along the canals and winding into the heart of Augsburg. Pilgram Marpeck helped that with the cutting, the transporting, and the distribution of the woods, and its building projects, and it helped support all the different industries. Now, in the house where he lived, we don't know exactly, but we have just some precious little clues that we have. We can find St. Moritz Church. There's some discrepancy on this, that we know that he was close to the waterworks. Some of the records say, some of the books, rather I should say that it's north. It might have been what people were referring to as north in the way the map is structured, but closer, if you see closer up towards the where the waterworks were, is sort of where it's thought that this is where Pilgram Marpeck and Anna lived. Now, and also a little interesting side note with Anna is that there's some records that makes it sound like that she possibly was a midwife working with the different refugee populations and things like that here, which is also a fascinating detail of the Marpecks here in this city. So yeah, here it's a little more quiet. We don't have a lot of personal letters. We do have some works that he's done, but this piece with his years of experience from his childhood to Strasbourg to here is we really see an Anabaptist leader who is a bivocational worker, putting his skills, but yet still pastoring in all his free time, and it seems his wife right alongside with him. Very inspiring leader.
One thing about here, and that is the government knew, the city government knew that he was pastoring an Anabaptist congregation.
Right.
And they scolded him for that. So there's several places in the official writings where it gives his salary, and it says that they reprimanded him and they wanted him to stop. But he must have been pretty useful and helpful, because they never followed through on that. Where he starts, he was under the Habsburgs, and they weren't going to tolerate him despite his abilities. In Strasbourg, he was pretty aggressive, more so than Sattler, and so the Protestant church leaders there got to not like him and expelled him.
And that's how he ends up.
Yeah, we don't know much about what happened in St. Gallen and Appenzell when he built that linen processing plant, but and then he came here. But everywhere he obviously was a man of skill, and where he caused too much friction, perhaps he needed to leave.
Yeah, that makes
Or
sense.
where the Catholics were Habsburgs and were not going to allow him to stay.
There was only a small Anabaptist congregation here, a very small one. So it's some of the, as we look at historians, question, why did you move there? It does seem to be connected with this position, and he was still able to minister to this area in that way. And you're right, writing a statement of faith got him in trouble, and it is in record that they rebuked him for it, but yeah, just let it go.
We're right here in Rattenberg. I can literally see Pilgram
Right.
Marpeck's house is right there, where the Anabaptist executions was 71, according to the plaque up there, 71 executions up at the castle there. And I can see that from here and how that so deeply affected Pilgram Marpeck. Let's get a little deeper.
Okay.
Like, what were the things he wrote about, talked about, cared about?
I think it would be good to talk about some of the things that were either unique or at least they were his strengths.
Okay, good point. Yeah,
And-
yeah.
There are at least two things that I would like us to talk about. One of them is his view of how to do discipline. Well, all the Anabaptists believed you should have a
Right.
discipled church, but sometimes there needed to be discipline. And so he has an interesting take on that. We're going to talk a little bit about his view of the sacraments, but that is actually part of a broader thing. He had a very incarnational understanding of how God worked in the world. He believed that both the physical and the spiritual were important. That was a big that was a big problem area for the Anabaptists. Our emphasis on the internal, that we actually turn to Jesus, makes us liable to go for the spiritualist side. One of the big groups, I don't mean size-wise, but as far as influence, in the beginning of the Reformation was the spiritualists. That was often a tension point. One of the early Anabaptists was Hans Denk. Seeking to know God as deeply as possible spiritually isn't bad.
Right.
But he may have gone a little bit too far the other way. In fact, Hans Denk said that as long as I have the Word, meaning Jesus, inside of me, I don't need the Word, the written Word.
Right.
So, and the other
Okay, so he took
Yeah.
it pretty far.
so that's how far the spiritualists came. Well, and like I said,
Wow.
the real body of spiritualists said we just can't do any of this. Got to wait. And so that did pull on us. And one of the really good things about Marpeck is that he recognized that what it means to be a human is to be a physical body and a soul, and a soul, a spirit.
As we look through history, so many times it's those opponents that kind of help give us these documents that we have. And in arguing with Speckveld and these ones that were the hyper spiritualists, we get this beautiful incarnation theology that you're talking about. And one of my favorite parts about Marpeck is his view of the sacraments. Now, when you're reading any of the Anabaptist sacraments, it's discussions about sacraments, you got to keep the context in mind. What all of them, all the Reformation, many within the Catholic Church and the Reformation churches were arguing against was the idea they call ex opere operato, which is the idea that from the act it happens, no matter what, mechanically. And so many people within both the Catholic Church and the Reformed Church were saying, there's got to be faith. There's got to be something inside that's reality. So you see people like Hubmaier and Marpeck and several of them make the arguments that they're pushing to the way they're doing this mechanical type of sacraments, and they're saying, did you forget to read 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where it says that you've come, so what you're doing is not the Lord's Supper. So somewhere along the way, that the morality matters, a real life matters, and they're not saying that, oh, if you have any sin, you can't have a sacrament, or somebody has to be perfect. A lot of people like to say, oh, this is a Donatist thing all over again, and you have to be perfect. They're not saying that, but they are saying it's got to be real, and there's got to be faith. And so in developing this, you get a rich tradition if you understand what the context is. And one of my favorite quotes from Marpeck is, here's the one that I think comes out of his discussions there with Speckveld and everything. And he says this, and I think it puts it in an excellent way. He says, if the heart is true, it is in communion with the body of Christ through the breaking of bread. If the heart is not right in faith and in love, a man eats damnation into himself, as Paul states, and judgment, as mentioned before. This is briefly our concept, understanding, and opinion of the words of the Lord's Supper. Therefore, we exhort and further request that everybody put aside semantic battles concerning the bread and the wine and search his own heart concerning this matter. He's saying, like, the Marburg colloquy and all these debates and whether, the metaphysics and everything. He's saying, guys, you need to put this aside and look inside. You're missing the most important part. And then he goes on, each one must individually fight with himself and campaign against all evil, malice, and hatred in his own heart and mind, which are always bracing themselves against the truth and fighting it. In another place, he expresses it this way, for that which the Father does, speaking of the communion, the Son of Man does simultaneously. The Father as Spirit internally, the Son as man externally. Therefore, the external baptism and the Lord's Supper are not signs, rather, they are the external work and essence of the Son. That's pretty strong. Mm-hmm. So I think that balance that we see in there, that the genuineness, and we're getting into all these debates and everything, and he's like, has your life changed?
And talking about that, maybe if we would read, not just Marpeck, but if we would read the early Anabaptists, they did not say, okay, just give your life to the Lord and that's it. Everything's. You read in there about we have to struggle on the inside.
Yes.
That was a consistent theme throughout Anabaptism. Not that, okay, turn your life over to the Lord and everything will be grand. They would say things like, Christ has to be born in you and grow in you, and it's going to hurt. And in other words, they took a very realistic understanding. Like you were saying, Marpeck would say, internally, you have to have faith and you have to believe this, but it also has to have an outward working. So the Father is the spiritual, and the Son who came as man is the physical. And everything, the two main things they looked at were baptism and the Lord's Supper. It has to have that internal spiritual part, and it has to have the physical part. Zwingli would have said, this is just a sign. The communion is just a sign. And he also would say, just to bring another sacrament in, he accused us of being legalists because we care when the baptism happens.
Oh, right.
You are either chosen by God or not. You're either elect or not. So it doesn't matter if you're baptized before you know that or after. And we say, no, there's actually free will involved here. You have to hear the gospel, respond to it, and then ask to be baptized. There's a reason for the order.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We're getting right to the core of what this a splintering or disagreement, with the original Anabaptists starting in that context, especially you're talking about these two sacraments, right?
On that same thought, I remember one of the arguments, they would say that it's like the Zwingli and Luther, Calvin too, would really push the point hard on eighth day circumcision and say, okay, look at the babies in the old covenant. They're born, and then on the eighth day we would circumcise them. And so why can't you see it as the same thing in the New Testament? And also we baptize babies on the eighth day. The Anabaptists answered, we agree with you, but you must let them be born first.
Born again.
And that's the point.
And
so being born by faith into the kingdom of God, and that makes sense. It does tie up to the whole thing.
But that is so counter to what had been taught for so long that, however you said it, by the act itself, It's just go through the mechanics of it and boom, the thing happens.
Catholics recognized that when someone chose to join a monastery, something is happening. And sometimes they called that their second baptism.
Interesting.
That is important.
Fascinating.
In other words, they even saw instinctively, I think, that baptism is a marker when I've turned around somehow. And so if I live in Rattenberg and then I decide, I really want to serve the Lord, I'm going to join the monastery. That's it's not. They don't baptize you again.
Sure.
But those vows, they sometimes saw as your second baptism.
So we just went through a bit of
Marpeck's sacramental theology. And I'm curious, how is he looking at the life of the church? What is church life like? Dig into that a bit. I know he did some writing on that. How would you describe it? What did he say?
It's interesting, during the early Anabaptists, they had a lot of things in common. And by far, we can look at the things, particularly the ones that survived, had a lot of things in common. And all of them believed in community of some kind. All of them believed in discipline and order. But how you worked out, how you did your community, what you were the lines of your community differed from community to community. And Marpeck represents a circle that tried not to be so spelled out. In my opinion, for what it's worth, I see Marpeck as a very charismatic, very successful, it used to be wealthy, very capable man who just had natural leadership. And so I think around him, you just grew a community.
He does say some very good things about when the church needs to discipline. And I think we can learn from him, but I also think we can learn from the others.
I agree. We should not put him in this libertine window.
Oh, he's not libertine.
Exactly. And so because he's criticizing maybe the Hutterites and the Swiss Brethren, he's not saying just live freely. That's not what he's saying.
Well, yeah, but his group died out. Now, what he said that's really good as far as going overboard, what we should do is not look at a bud on a tree.
Okay.
We shouldn't look at the little leaf starting to come out. We need to see what the fruit is.
Yes.
That's when you judge. Now, if you see a bud that makes you suspicious, that's the time to talk. He is exactly right. He's exactly right. But I don't know if he didn't seem to pass it on.
Yeah.
And so his criticism is really good.
But you're saying it kind of dies with Marpeck.
Well, it seems to.
It seems to.
In some
but
ways.
it's a good, maybe we've rediscovered it since 1950 to help us think this through.
Yeah.
His incarnational stuff,
I agree,
is wonderful.
His
moderation about how to approach discipline is wonderful. But we all fail. So, all I'm saying is that perhaps we've got a good pattern here. When I first became Beachy, I was 20.
Yeah.
And I came because of non-resistance. And they said, dress this way. Well, they never really clearly explained why, but who cares? I want what's good here. And I saw many good things. I saw community, I saw non-resistance, and so I really wanted to belong, but how I dressed didn't matter so much. Well, then when I was in my 30s, I had several experiences where I saw that everybody cares how they dress. Everybody cares how they dress. Yeah. And everybody follows somebody. Right. When I saw that, it just flipped everything. Okay, I know why we do this now. The others, I think, had a little more structure.
So you're saying the others, as in at the time of Marpeck.
The other Anabaptists would have had more structure.
Okay.
They would have read Schleitheim. They would have seen how their other congregations are forming.
Right.
Okay.
And this does seem a bit more charismatically led. And so both things together are really, really good.
Yeah.
So I love this guy. I'm not putting him down. I'm saying, though, that some of his critique, perhaps, of the Swiss Brethren was a bit strong.
Let me read you one real quick, straight from the Kunstbuch. Again, whoever establishes, commands, or prohibits any order outside the divine order and omnipotence denies God's power and glory. The heathen have done this, and by their own violence have become their own law and order. Thereby they also condemn themselves according to divine decision without law, for they are a law unto themselves, an imitation of God. This imitation, as their poets say, they have stolen from God. So it's pretty strong stuff, and he goes through several things.
That is pretty strong.
Well, as a person who studies church history and loves it, the scriptures give us they give us the foundation, but there are always new questions coming up, and somebody has to wrestle with those and say, this is what is meant. And that almost misses that.
Yeah.
Now, I am
yeah.
absolutely sure Marpeck was a Trinitarian Christian. I'm absolutely sure he would have said he believes the Apostles' Creed, but that came from somewhere. It didn't just.
Right.
It came
Right.
from wrestling.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example from today. In the early church, they read in the scriptures God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, and yet there's one God. What does that mean? They wrestled for hundreds of years, and they came up with either the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, whichever one you want to think about. Also, they knew Jesus. There were scriptures that said Jesus is man and Jesus is God. What's that mean? So they wrestled with these things, and they came out with good explanations as far as we can understand in this present life. But my point is that the church has wrestled all the way through time with new questions today, and they had to look to the scriptures. And we can both look back at how the church wrestled with these kinds of ideas, and also some things have been dealt with. For instance, Jesus is the picture of what it means to be a human. So we've got to go back to that stuff, wrestle with it the way they did. But it's not just something you pull out of the Bible.
Right.
You know, I'm an Anabaptist. I've chosen to be an Anabaptist. Sometimes I think they misunderstood where they were coming from. That they actually got some good things from their Catholic tradition.
They took more. And so finding their way through those balances, I think, is what some of these early days was doing.
I wonder what would have happened if instead of being persecuted, they were maybe shunted aside, but we'll let you be Anabaptists. And they could have gotten together and talked these things over. They already did some wonderful, amazing things, like the Schleitheim Conference. I don't know how they got in touch with the right people and got them there, but they did conferences secretly, often. Like other Anabaptists, his approach was Nachfolge Christi, or the discipleship of Christ. We follow Christ.
Yeah. He taught a cross that was not just substitutionary, it was participatory.
Yes. And if you want to look into early church history, look up Christus Victor. That's what saves us is our participation in the humanity of Christ. Christ did everything we should have done instead of the fall.
Living that out.
And so he lived out the perfect human life. We are participating with him, and we're drawing our life from him, and gradually, painfully, but gradually, we're becoming more and more like him.
By the grace of God.
So Pilgram Marpeck was quite the guy.
He really was. You know, he was a leader
that was willing to take risk, both personally and theologically. You know, we think of his hometown, place where he was raised. He had everything a man could want. And when he came on to radical Christianity, truly following Christ, he was able to give it all up. When he went to Strasbourg and finally making it there again, doing well, leading a church, but when pressed, again, he said, I'll leave. Even theologically, when he had some of his people that he was close to seeming to deny parts of the incarnation, or even become spiritualists where it doesn't bring it out, he really brought in a rich, deep, historic Christianity, and defending many of his views, both his sacramental views and his theological views, with a rich historical incarnation theology that comes out in a lot of his teachings. He was quite a person.
So my question is then, what happened to Pilgram Marpeck?
Well, he lived here and worked for the government until 1556, and then the record of paying him ends. So he died here peacefully. He wasn't martyred. One of the interesting things about him, though, is that we did have some of his writings already in the early 1900s. But in the 1950s, Delbert Gratz discovered a significant-sized book called a Kunstbuch, which means the art book. And it has a lot of Marpeck's writings, but it also has the writings of his circle. It's written very artistically, but that gave us a lot more information about him. At this point, we have records, official documents, something like we might have for Menno. Some of the significant things about him are his recognition of the importance of the incarnation, that God became one of us. But one that I think is also significant is his understanding of how to use the ban. All the Anabaptists believed in using the ban, but he felt that some were too ready to use it. And maybe because he had actually lived in eastern Switzerland for a while, and he felt the Swiss were too strict, that might be one reason that he wrote about this.
In this same city of Augsburg, Anabaptist leaders would meet in secret to plan a strategy for missions. History would remember this as the Martyrs' Synod, because nearly every man who attended would soon die. These evangelists, joined by the newly organized Hutterites, would carry the message of Christ further than ever before. In the next episode, we'll come face to face with true missional dedication and the men and women who gave up everything to carry the message of Jesus across a broken